Emotional vampires. That's something that's on everyone's mind these days. What is an emotional vampire and how do we protect against them in time for Halloween? That's the discussion today. Emotional vampires, oftentimes how we think about them is that they are these separate, obstructing, energetic forces in our lives. Sometimes they're a family member, sometimes they're a friend, sometimes they're a frenemy, sometimes they're just someone that we have to see, a coworker at work or a boss. Sometimes they're someone on public transportation that we have to sit next to. Emotional vampires can be everywhere. And really, what an emotional vampire is, at least what we think they are, is that we think that they're somebody who is in a perpetual, potentially manipulative cycle where they are over time continually trying to pull others, including ourselves, into their own worlds of despair, sadness, destructive emotions, and their own problems, which oftentimes, when we think about emotional vampires, we think of them as people that have a lot of problems and are pulling other people into them as some sort of, I would describe it as evil or cruel, manipulative type of energetic modality. If this is the way that we view emotional vampires, then pretty much all the time we encounter one, we're going to be sucked in to, I would describe it as their BS, so to speak, their nonsense, all of the things that we fear from them, which is all of their emotional problems, and then the fact that they are maybe using others or sucking others in, sucking them emotionally dry, and bringing distress wherever they go. If we view others in this way, we will perpetuate in our own minds the fear response, which then we will feel as if we were being drained continuously when we encounter people with emotional problems, and also those that have sometimes perpetual tendencies that we see that are pulling other people into maybe an anxious or a distressing worldview that they hold. How can we protect ourselves? We can protect ourselves by flipping this script entirely on our experience and our view of others. If we don't view others in a way that describes them as emotional vampires, but instead we see those that at first where we recoil in horror, oh my gosh, this person's going to pull me in and suck away all my emotional energy. Instead, if we think, this is just someone going through a bunch of problems, this person is actually really an emanation of compassion or goodness in the world, but they've lost track of that. They've fallen prey to a modality of confusion potentially, or they're here to test our own resolve. They're here to really test our own practice, but they themselves are actually already perfected. If we take this perspective that these emotional vampires are actually already perfected beings, then instead of getting caught up in any potential of them being, I would describe it as soul sucking or something to that nature, something horrifying emotionally, we naturally actually will create boundaries. We will see them as not really the people that they may manifest as around us. So, for example, if we have somebody, a coworker, for example, that perpetually pulls us in to their emotional garbage, they complain to us endlessly. They manipulate us to kind of be holding the strings, so to speak, and they just kind of let us falter, let us fail, and we instead of seeing them as this emotional vampire, we go, that's just, whatever their name is. Let's just say Frank. That's just Frank. Frank is just like this. And actually, Frank is going through a really tough time, but Frank is a really sweet person, has the same capacity of sweetness as everybody else. And because of his capacity for sweetness, uh, the all of this kind of emotional stuff, all of this weird feelings of sucking away my life force that I have every time I'm with Frank, is actually just this temporary confusion on Frank's side. And the way I can help Frank is by actually seeing that Frank's nature is not this at all. And then when we do that, what happens is we end up taking a sort of a cheerful, perpetually cheerful and helpful role in Frank's life. And instead of, getting caught up in whatever is going on for Frank, we just say, oh, Frank, here's how it is, buddy. But I don't have time necessarily, but you'll figure it out. I have faith in you to figure out your own problems. I have faith in you to not be so manipulative. I have faith in you to be that way. And again, this is what we have going on in our minds. We might not be saying that. Obviously, that would be pretty weird if we were saying that. I have faith in you. Frank might get all sorts of weird about that. But instead, in our own minds, we think, I have faith in Frank. Frank isn't an emotional vampire. Frank's just a person. And actually, his nature is total compassion. His nature is a good person, and temporarily, maybe every time he mentions certain things, he might seem confused, but that's not really who he is. And because he's not really this emotional vampire, I don't actually have to treat him like he is. Instead, I can treat him very casually. And that oftentimes will destroy any types of, I would describe it as, strings or rope, whatever kind of tension there is that maybe Frank has over you. You just act totally casually. Frank might try to be manipulative towards you, and you're like, oh, Frank, that's not working today because that's not really who you are, buddy. And you just go on with your life. You are suddenly empowered to not actually acknowledge any of the emotional vampirism, if you will. You don't have to acknowledge it. You don't have to even play into it. You don't even have to be a part of it. And if, say, Frank actually is an emotional vampire, then what happens is he's powerless. He can't manipulate anymore because to him, you're you're like the least fun person in the world. You are immune because you are, quote, acting dumb, and maybe in his mind, but actually what you're doing is protecting yourself by just seeing an impossibility of him being an emotional vampire. And then that will release the situation, by the nature of impermanence. Eventually, Frank will get bored of you because his little games won't work. And this is, again, if he's an actually emotional vampire. So if you have faith in this practice, what ends up happening is you go through your life and never get pulled into anyone else's problems. See everyone else's problems as their true nature is already worked out through your own practice of seeing them as such. Seeing them as worked out, feeling like everything is already okay from the beginning, in the middle, and in the end. And if you feel this way and you make it a diligent practice, then no one can get to you. No one can come to you and tell you that you don't know what's going on. No one can tell you that there is any sort of reason to get upset or reason to get bogged down in some sort of emotion or, insecurity or whatever. No, there's not. There's never a point in time that you would ever feel that way or need to feel that way. And if you make this a diligent practice, then you will be bolstered in your mind, in your heart, of that truth. And all emotional vampires will slowly but surely be perfected, either by removing themselves entirely from your life, or by actually transforming into who they really are. the person that you're viewing them as, which is actually an okay person just going through a tough time. So this is the way that we can Van Helsing the vampires in our lives. I hope this helps all of you. And until next time, wishing you the very best. Much love.